All right, guys, so today we're going to continue factoring, but this time we're going to take it a step further. We're going to find our greatest common factor, factor it out first, and then completely factor it. All right, so finding the greatest common factor and taking it out actually makes it easier to factor. So my first step is I'm going to find the greatest common factor between 3v squared, 27v, and 30. Okay. All right, so remember you can always use your calculator, menu 25, and you can type in your two smallest numbers and it will help you figure it out. Well, just for time's sake, I know the greatest common factor between 3, 27, and 30 is a 3. And then I look for variables, v's, v's. This 30 does not have a v, so v is not a common factor. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out my greatest common factor, which means I'm going to divide each of these groups by 3. So I know I put my greatest common factor out front, and inside the parentheses is what I put when I do my division. Well, I know 3 divided by 3 cancels, so I'm left with my v squared. Negative 27 divided by 3 is a negative 9. There is nothing to cancel out this v, so I'm going to leave it alone. And negative 30 divided by 3 is a negative 10. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor this part right here. So remember, I look at my last sign. The last sign tells me that they're going to be different, which means I'm going to have one plus sign, one minus sign. So this piece right here is what I'm going to go tic-tac-toe. So I put my first term in the first box, my last term in the box beside it, my middle term including the sign down here. Then we find our factors. My factors of v squared are v times v. My factors of 10 are 1 times 10, 10 times 1, 2 times 5, and 5 times 2. All right, so I'm going to put my v here, my other v in this box. And let's go ahead and try my first one, my 1 and my 10. Remember, we multiply across. V times 1 is 1v. V times 10 is 10v. Remember, my signs must be different. One has to be a positive and negative, and together it has to give me a negative 9. Well, I know a negative 10 and a positive 1 combined to give me a negative 9, so we found the 1. That's it. So I'm going to slide my signs over. My plus goes on top, my minus slides over on bottom, and then we crisscross. So one of my factors is v minus 10. My other factor was v plus 1. And we can't forget to put our greatest common factor out front. So this is my final factored answer. All right, let's try this next one. The first thing we're going to do is find our greatest common factor. So like I said, you can use menu 25 in your calculator to type in the two smallest to try to help you find your greatest common factor, but for time's sake, I'm going to let you know that 6 goes into all 3 of these numbers. I see ends, but this group does not have an n, so they don't have ends in common, so my greatest common factor is a 6, so I'm going to divide each of these by 6. So I know I put my greatest common factor out front, open my parentheses, and inside the parentheses I'm going to put what I get when I divide each of these. Well, my 6 on top cancels my 6 on bottom, so I'm left with n squared. 72 divided by 6 is a positive 12, and I can't forget about that n. Then finally, 192 divided by 6 is a positive 32. So I know this is the part right here that I'm going to be factoring tic-tac-toe wise. All right, so I look at my last sign. It tells me that my signs will be the same, which means it will be a plus and a plus or a minus and a minus. So to determine which one it is, I look at the first one, which tells me it should be 2 plus signs. All right, so I put my first term in the first box, my last term in the box beside it, and my middle term, including its sign, in the bottom. So let's go ahead and find my factors. My factors of n squared are n times n. Okay, my factors of 32 are 1 and 32. I do it backwards. 2 and 16. I'm going to go out to the side because I'm running out of room. 4 and 8, and 8 and 4. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put my in each one of these boxes. Oops, sorry guys. All right, and there's quite a few to choose from. I'm going to use a little bit of common sense. I know I'm trying to get to a 12, so I'm going to skip each of these and I'm going to go straight for 4 and 8. Multiply across. N times 4 is 4n. N times 8 is 8n. Remember, we know our signs have to be the same, and they both have to be plus signs. So we check, does a positive 4 and a positive 8 combine to give me a positive 12? It does. So I found the one that works. So I'm going to slide the signs over. So slide your plus over on top and on bottom, and then we crisscross. So one of my factors is n plus 8. My other factor is n plus 4, and I cannot forget to put my greatest common factor out front. All right, trying another one. So we're going to find our greatest common factor. So I'm going to start with my coefficients. So 2, 22, and 56. I know the greatest number that goes into all three of these numbers is a 2. And then I look at my variables. I see that this time they all have x's and they all have at least 2 x's. So my greatest common factor this time is 2x squared. So that's what I'm going to divide each of these by. So my greatest common factor goes out front. And inside the parentheses, I'm going to put what I get when I do my division. This 2 on top cancels that 2 on bottom. I know x to the 4th divided by x squared is x squared, because the rule is to subtract your exponents. 4 minus 2 gives me this 2. 22 divided by 2 is a positive 11. X to the 3rd divided by x squared is going to give me my x to the 1st power, because 3 minus 2 is a 1. 56 divided by 2 is a positive 28. And this x squared on top cancels the x squared on bottom. So this is the piece that I'm going to tic-tac-toe. I look at my last sign. It tells me that they need to be the same. So I know it's either going to be a plus and a plus or a minus and a minus. To determine that, I look at the first one. So I know it's a plus and a plus. So I'm going to put my x squared in my first box, 28 in the box beside that. And my middle term, including the sign, in my last box. So now to find the factors of x squared, it's x times x. My factors of 28 are 1 times 28, and do the reverse of that. 2 times 14. 4 and 7. Okay, so those are all my factors. So I'm going to go ahead and put each of these x's in the boxes. Okay, so I have quite a long list, so I'm going to use a little bit of common sense. I know I'm trying to get to 11x, so I'm going to skip all these and jump straight to 4 and 7. I multiply across. X times 4 is 4x. X times 7 is 7x. I remember my signs have to be the same. They both have to be positive. So does a positive 4 and a positive 7 combine to give me a positive 11? It does, so I found the one that works. So I slide my signs on over, and then I'm going to crisscross. So one of my factors is x plus 7. My other factor is x plus 4. And I can't forget to put my greatest common factor out front, which was 2x squared. All right, keeping it going. We're going to find my greatest common factor. So I'm looking between 9, 75, and 126. Remember, you can always use the calculator to help you out. But I know the greatest number that goes into all three of these is 3. So then I look at my variables. I see that each group has x's and they all have at least 2 x's. So my greatest common factor is 3x squared. So that's what I'm going to divide each of these by. So I lead with my greatest common factor and I open my parentheses and I'm going to put what I get when I divide inside here. So 9 divided by 3 is 3. X to the fourth divided by x squared is x squared because you subtract your exponents, 4 minus 2. Next group, negative 75 divided by 3 is a negative 25. X to the third divided by x to the second is just x to the first because 3 minus 2 is a 1. And finally, 126 divided by 3 is a positive 42. My x squared on top cancels the x squared on bottom. So this is the piece that I need to tic-tac-toe. I look at my last sign. It tells me my signs have to be the same, meaning I'm using a plus and a plus or a minus and a minus. To determine which one that is, I look at the first sign. So I know it has to be a minus and a minus sign. I put 3x squared in my first box, 42 in the box beside it. I put my middle term in the last box, including the sign. Now we find our factors of 3x squared, that's 3x times x. My factors of 42 are 1 times 42, 42 and 1, 2 and 21, and flip-flop that, 6 and 7, oops, and flip-flop that. That was kind of ugly, let me fix that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put my 3x and x in those boxes. And now we're going to do a little trial and error, okay? I'm going to go ahead and skip over 1 and 42 because a 42 is way bigger than 25, and especially if I took that 42 and multiplied by 3. So I'm going to go ahead and skip over these, and I'm going to jump straight to this guy right here, okay? Just because I'm trying to use a little bit of common sense to save me. I'm not going to scratch them out until I actually try them, okay? But common sense is telling me this is too large, this is too large. So I'm going to try 2 and 21. So I multiply across. 3x times 2 is 6x. I multiply across the bottom. X times 21 is 21x. This tells me they both have to be negative signs. Well, I know a negative 6 and a negative 21 will not give me a negative 25. So that is not the one. So I'm going to go ahead and scratch it out and erase. Because trial and error. Here we go. Let's try the next one. So I multiply across. 3x times 21 is a 63x. Multiply across the bottom. X times 2 is a 2x. That one kind of told me common sense wise it wasn't going to work. I knew if I took 21 and multiplied by 3 I would get quite a large number, not close to the 25 I was wanting. So that one doesn't work either. There's no way I could put these together to give me 25. But remember, if you ever want to use common sense to skip one because you don't think it makes much sense, go for it. All right, so now I'm going to try 6 and 7. I multiply across. 3x times 6 is 18x. Across the bottom, x times 7 is 7x. Okay, I know an 18 and a 7 will give me a 25. I know my signs have to be both minus signs, so let's check. Does a negative 18 and a negative 7 combine to give me a negative 25? It does. Negative 18 plus a negative 7 is negative 25, so we found the one. So I'm going to go ahead and slide my signs over. My negative slides over on top, my negative slides over on bottom, and I crisscross. So one of my factors is 3x minus 7. My other factor is x minus 6. And I can't forget to put my greatest common factor out front here, which was 3x squared. Beautiful. Okay, these next two, we won't do too many. Well, first let's take out the greatest common factor, and then we'll talk about why we won't do too many of these. These are a little bit tougher, and I'll show you why here in a second. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is find the greatest common factor. So I'm trying to find the greatest number that will go into 24, 116, and 168. Remember, you're always welcome to use your calculator, but the greatest number that will go into all three of these is a 4. So then I look at my variables. I see that every single group has an r, and they all have at least a single r. So my greatest common factor is 4r. So that's what I'm going to divide by. So I put my greatest common factor, and in parentheses, I'm going to put what I get when I do my division. So 24 divided by 4 is 6. R to the third divided by R to the first is R to the second, because we subtract. 3 minus 1 is the 2. 116 divided by 4 is a positive 29. R squared divided by R to the first is going to give me R to the first, because 2 minus 1 is 1. Now I'm going to take this negative 168, divide it by 4 to get a negative 42. The single r on top cancels that single r on bottom. So this is the piece that I'm going to have to tic-tac-toe. I look at my last sign. It's a minus sign, which tells me that the signs will be different. I'm going to have one positive and one negative over here. So I'm going to put my first term in the first box, my last term in the box beside that. My middle term, including the sign, goes in my bottom box. And let's find our factors. Okay, so this is why this one's a little bit more difficult, because my factors of 6r squared are 6r and r, but that's not it. I could also have 3r times 2r. And we won't do these as often in Algebra 1, but it's just going to add more to our trial and error, more guessing and checking. All right, let's find my factors of 42. 1 and 42. Flip-flop it. 2 and 21. Flip-flop it. 6 and 7. Flip-flop it. All right, so I'm going to try these first, 6r and r. So the way this is going to have to work is I'm going to have to try every single one of these options with 6r and r. If none of those work, then I would move on to this guy. Like I said, sometimes let's try to use a little bit of common sense here. I don't want to use a 42. Because if I put a 42, multiply it by 6, that's going to give me a large number. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump. Let's try my 2 and 21, okay? So I'm jumping to this guy right here. So I multiply across the top. 6r times 2 is 12r. R times 21 is 21r. And then I see, is there any way a 12 and a 21 can give me a 29? There's no way either by adding or subtracting I can get this 29, so that does not work. Don't want to completely scratch it out right now because I haven't tried this one with this one yet. So I'm not going to scratch it out, but I know that this one does not work with the 6RR. So I'm going to try all these first. Okay, so let's go ahead and erase. So I just tried 2 and 21, so now let's try 21. Oops. And 2. So I multiply across the top. I know 6r times 21 is 126. R. Honestly, I can kind of stop right there. Look how big that number is. There's no way. So that doesn't work. But let me finish. R times 2 is 2r. There's no way by either adding or subtracting I can get a 126 and a 2 together by adding or subtracting to get a 29. So neither one of these worked for 6r and r. So now let's move on to 6 and 7. I multiply across the top. 6r times 6 is a 36r. R times 7 is a 7r. All right, now we're in business. I know a 36 minus a 7 would give me a 29, so that's looking good. So I found the one that's going to work. Let's talk about our signs. I know they're going to be different. Well, if I want to end up with a positive 29, I know a positive 36 and a negative 7 add up to give me a positive 29. 36 plus a negative 7 is a positive 29. So we found the one that works. Let's slide our signs on over. So my plus slides over on top, my minus slides over on bottom. And then we crisscross. All right, so I have 6r minus 7 as one of my factors. My other factor is r plus 6. And we can't forget to lead with our greatest common factor, which was 4r. All right, let's start by finding our greatest common factor. So the greatest number that goes into 4, 25, and 25. Well, 1 is the only number that goes into 4, 25, and 25. Your calculator would have told you that same thing. Well, I don't really care about a 1 because 1 goes into every single number there is. So there's really nothing other than 1, so not worrying about that. So now I'm going to look at my variables. I see V's, V's, but this one does not have a V, so V is not in common. I see R's in every group. They all have at least a single R, so my greatest common factor is R. So that's what I'm going to divide by. So I'm going to lead with my greatest common factor, and in parentheses I'm going to put what I get when I do division. I see this R on top cancels this R on bottom, so my 4V squared will drop down. This R on top cancels this R on bottom, so my negative 25V will drop down. Finally, this R on top cancels this R on bottom, so this positive 25 will drop down. Okay, so this is the part that I have to tic-tac-toe. I look at my last sign. It's a plus sign telling me the signs will be the same. So I know it will either be a plus and a plus or a minus and a minus. I look at the first sign to tell me which one. So I know they both have to be minus signs. All right, I'm going to put this 4V squared in the first box, this 25 in the box beside it. And then I put my middle term, including my sign, in the bottom one. And let's find my factors of 4V squared. So I know it's 4V times V, but we also have the option of 2V times 2V. Let's find the factors of 25, 1 and 25, 25 and 1, and then 5 and 5. Alright, so I know I have to try each of these with 4V and V. If none of those work, then I'll move on to trying each of these with 2V and 2V. So 4V and V. Just for time's sake, I'm going to stop with the guessing and checking. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and jump to this guy right here. Just letting you know that's the one that's going to work out. But if you're doing it on your own, always do your guessing and checking until you find the one that works. Okay, I multiply across the top. 4V times 5 is 20V. V times 5 is 5V. Well, I know that a 20 and a 5 can give me a 25, so let's make sure it works with my signs. I know the signs both have to be minus signs, so I check myself. A negative 20 and a negative 5 does combine. Negative 20 plus a negative 5 is negative 25, so we found the one. Slide your signs over, so a negative slides over on top and on bottom, and we crisscross. So one of my factors is 4V minus 5. My other factor is V minus 5. And I'm not going to forget to lead with my greatest common factor, which was an R. All right, let's step it up one more notch. Okay, I'm going to start by finding my greatest common factor. Okay. Usually, we don't pay much mind to the positives or negatives when we're trying to factor out our greatest common factor. But we don't want this first term to be negative. Oops. We don't want that first term to be negative when we are factoring. So what I'm going to do in order to fix that is I'm going to factor out a negative. So I'm going to go ahead. Why is that doing that? There we go. There we can see it. All right, so to fix this problem of this first one being a negative, I'm going to factor out a negative. Okay. So remember, the only reason I'm doing that is because I don't like this first term to be negative. So that's why I'm going to factor out this negative sign. All right, next I'm going to look at my variable. 6, 23, and 10. The greatest number that goes into each one of these numbers is a 1, so I don't have to worry about a 1. So now I look at my x's. I see that all groups have at least a single x. And then I look for my y's. Well, I see that this one has a y, but the first and last group do not. So y is not in common. So I'm going to take out and factor out a negative x. All right, so here's my greatest common factor. Let's put in here what we get when we do the division. Well, I know this negative and this negative cancel. So my 6 drops down. I know an x to the third divided by x to the first is going to give me x squared because we subtract the exponents. 3 minus 1 is 2. I see that this negative cancels this negative. So my 23 drops down. X squared divided by x is going to give me x to the first power because 2 minus 1 is 1. There's nothing to cancel out this y, so it drops down. All right, last group. This negative cancels this negative. So my 10 drops down. All right, I see that this x cancels this x, but that y squared will drop. All right. So this is the piece that we're going to have to tic-tac-toe. Fun, fun. That tells me that my signs will be the same, meaning either a plus plus or a minus minus. To determine which one, I look at the first sign. That's telling me they both have to be plus signs. So first term in my first box, the last term in the box beside it. My middle term including the sign in the last box. All right, my factors of 6x squared, I have two options. It could be 6x times x or 3x times 2x. Okay, this next one, my factors of 10y squared. So instead of just thinking like 1 times 10, I have to keep in mind this y squared. So I know 1y times 10y would give me 10y squared. Flip-flop that. So also 2y times 5y, flip-flop that. All right, so those are my options. So I would have to try each of these with the 6x and x. Just for time's sake, I'm going to let you know it's this guy. So we're going to start with So it can get very tedious, but the more you do it, the quicker you'll be, and the more you'll start to just see things in your head to try to get to this 23. All right, so I'm just telling you right now that this is the one it's going to be. None of these would work with 6x and x, so you're trusting me. So that's a given. I'm just telling you that. When you're doing it on your own, you'll have to play. All right, so let's try our first option, 1y and 10y. I multiply across. 3x times 1y is 3x and a y. Multiply across the bottom. 2x times 10y is going to give me a 20, an x and a y. So I'm trying to decide, is there any way I can add or subtract these two numbers to get to 23? Yes, I know that's possible. So I have to check my signs. I know I have to use two plus signs. So let's see if it still works. A positive 3 and a positive 20 can add together to give me this positive 23. Awesome. So slide your signs over. So I'm going to crisscross. So one of my factors is 3x plus 10y. And then on my next factor, it's 2x plus 1y. No, you do not have to put that 1. Do not forget to put your greatest common factor out front. All right, guys, we really won't see many of those, but it's good to introduce these to you because eventually you probably will do more of those. But in Algebra 1, you'll probably have very few of these that we're going to do. All right, let's try another one very similar. All right, so we're going to find our greatest common factor. So first I look at my coefficients. 7, 27, and 18. I don't have to worry about that negative thing because this first term is not a negative, so don't have to worry about factoring out a negative. So I'm looking at 7, 27, and 18. So if you want to use your calculator and do so, type in the two smallest ones. The calculator will tell you the only number that goes into 7 and 18 is a 1. So if 1 is the only thing they have in common, we don't really worry about it. Every number has 1 in common. So let's move on to variables. I see x's here, here, but no x's here. That's not in common. So then I'm looking at y's. Every single group has y's, and they all have at least a single y. So that's what I'm going to have to factor out. So start with my greatest common factor. In parentheses, let's put what we get when we divide. This y on top cancels this y on bottom, so my 7x squared drops down. My minus 27x will drop. But my y squared divided by y to the first will give me y to the first because 2 minus 1 is 1. My positive 18 will drop. But my y to the third divided by y to the first will give me y squared because 3 minus 1 is 2. So this is the piece that I'm going to tic-tac-toe. I look at my last sign. It tells me they will be the same. So either a plus plus or a minus minus. To determine, I look at my first sign. That tells me they both have to be minus signs. So I'm going to put this term in my first box, this one in my box beside that. I'm going to put my middle term, including the sign, in the last box. And now let's find my factors. Lucky us, the only factor for 7x squared is 7x times x. So now let's find the factors of 18y squared. So we have to keep those y's in mind. So it's 1y times 18y, and flip-flop that. 2y times 9y, and then 3y times 6y. All right, there's only one option for 7x and x, so great. Love that. Okay, let's do some trial and error. Okay, I know that this one, I'm not going to like this one at all because if I put 18 up here, 7 times 18 will give me a rather large number. So common sense wise tells me not to really use this one. Same thing with this guy. If I put a 9y up here, 7 times 9 will also give me a really pretty large number. It's not kind of close to 27. So I'm going to, just using kind of a little bit of common sense, skip this guy and this guy. So we can try this first one, 1y and 18y, just to give it a shot. Remember, don't scratch it out completely until you've actually done it. Multiply across the top. 7x times 1y is 7xy. Across the bottom, x times 18y is an 18xy. So remember, I'm trying to get to use these two numbers to either add or subtract to get me a 27. There's no way these two numbers give me 27, so that's not the way to go. Okay, I said I wanted to skip this one for now. Let's try this guy. 2y and 9y. Multiply across the top, 7x times 2y is going to give me a 14xy. Across the bottom, x times 9y is going to give me a 9xy. So I know either combining these two together I need to get a 27. There's no way a 14 and a 9 gives me a 27. So I know that's not going to work either. All right, so remember, mentally we said we don't think these are going to work. So let's move on to this guy, 3y and 6y. Multiply across the top. 7x times 3y is a 21xy. Across the bottom, x times 6y is 6xy. All right, that's looking better. I know a 21 and a 6 can give me a 27, so let's play with our signs. We said they have to be the same, both minus signs, so then we're going to check. Does it still work? Does a negative 21 and a negative 6 combine to give me a negative 27? It does. We found the one that works. So slide your signs over. Minus sign slides over on top and bottom, and then we crisscross. So one of my factors is 7x minus 6y. My other factor is x minus 3y. And do not forget to put your greatest common factor out front, and our greatest common factor was our y. So if these last two were pretty tough for you, that's okay. Remember, I just wanted to mainly introduce them to you. You'll see more of the first 6 problems. All right, bye guys.